15 times they're told, arise for prayer, Lord have mercy on us, in melody. So the deacon says, that's arise for prayer. And everyone responds, Lord forgive us. The priest says, Salah and everybody, which is peace be with you all, everybody responds, and with your spirit. Every that happens 15 times. And right before the communion takes place, there I think is 42 times. There's a back and forth in different melodies. The shortened form, the priest goes, Exio Maharana Christos, and the people respond, Exio Maharana Christos, which is the Jesus prayer. It's the prayer of the publican. Lord, have mercy on me. It's literally, Lord Christ, have mercy on us. That's how we say it in Ge'ez. But it's the publican's prayer from the Gospel of Luke, and it's the Jesus prayer that the Hesychasts in the Greek and the Egyptian desert tradition say. It's Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. That's our version of it.
Hello everyone, today I would like to introduce Deacon Henok, who is a deacon in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church and lives in California.
Formerly California, now in the great state of Washington.
Okay, he lives in Washington and is here to talk with me today about Ethiopian Orthodox chant. So thanks for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me on, Matthew.
Yeah, I must admit, the only time I've been to an Ethiopian church, it is funny that I'm wearing all black today, because I was also wearing all black the first time that I visited an Ethiopian Orthodox church. So I came in as this super Caucasian, all dressed in black, not knowing that I was 3 hours late to the service, arriving at 10 a.m. They bring me up to the front, and everyone else is Ethiopian, and they're all wearing completely white. So I'm the exact inverse of everybody in the congregation.
That's a great introduction. Had you gone on a funeral day, they would probably wear a lot more black. But yeah, on any given Sunday, usually all white. Maybe some different colors on the fringe. Like my fringe is a little green, as you can see today. And
Okay.
sometimes you'll see some people wearing teal or hot pink versions of the shawl. Um,
Interesting.
yeah, and some monks wear the yellow as well. So you may occasionally come across that. You hit the Othello or the Uno reverse on the congregation.
Yeah, I didn't know I was doing that, but it just kind of happened. I want to ask. So I went to the Ethiopian church, and it was fascinating. I have never heard music of this sort, and since I've listened to a bunch of albums of the music that I could find on Spotify, there is this weird effect that they have on everything, where they'll sing da, and then it'll go da, 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 and it'll like echo, and they're always singing on a microphone,
Yeah.
and it keeps echoing back and forth. And I hear this on all the recordings, and I heard it in the Ethiopian church that I visited that day. So what is that about?
Actually, it's funny. We were talking about North Carolina earlier. A good buddy of mine got his Master's of Theology from Duke Divinity, And it was around that time that he had exposure to other Christian traditions, and they asked him a similar question. And I would say that traditionally, obviously, maybe or not, there were no microphones, right? So that this is a very recent technology, but
Right.
one which is very widespread. And so you have a lot of like cavernous environments, which I'm sure has an acoustic effect. And
Okay.
the idea is that there should be one musical master at any parish whom the others are supposed to follow. But I think there's a strange tradition in Ethiopia of uh, maybe it's due to our hybridity or something else, but there's this tension of people wanting to have community-based things in which you would follow someone like that. But there's also this tension of like, I would say something akin to American rugged individualism, where they kind of do their own thing. And so I'm wondering if some of the echo you're hearing is like rugged individuals wanting to sing the liturgy, but not necessarily like following somebody else and kind of going at it at their own pace. And so that it creates a kind of weird delay. That's at least something that I've heard and experienced. I don't know if you'd explain it in a different way.
Well, on some of the recordings, like I think it's called mesmer. Is that yeah?
Yeah,
It's like
mezmor is a complicated term. It's actually the
okay.
same as the Hebrew. So the Hebrew word is mizmor, and is in Amharic is mazmur. It means psalm. So psalm,
Psalm.
literally psalm, which you could then
Okay.
say is a hymn or a spiritual song. And that itself, I would say, is divided into at least two different categories. One is the traditional mazmur, which would be associated with the traditional schools of clerical learning. And that would be, I'd say, the vast majority of the history of the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church. But then, beginning in the 1950s, and especially taking off in the 70s, and really like a revolution, you could say now, people have been translating first into Amharic and then
Mhm.
into English certain melodies that pre-existed and sometimes creating melodies like almost ex nihilo, although they always claim that it's based in something else, and making new modern songs. And these new modern songs aren't necessarily clergy. It's just like the people, the laity, coming up with them. And they're not performed properly in the liturgical setting, but while you're still in the Eucharistic liturgy and after it's over, it's kind of been a new order where people present these songs in the church after communion. But they're not a part of the liturgy. They're just really, I would say, the second definition of Mazmur, creations of the laity. And it started as creations of a few clergy, but then now it's really just lay people making stuff up.
Okay. So this is not. So if I'm listening to a recording that says mesmor, it may not necessarily be the liturgical music that's used throughout the liturgy.
Correct. And I would
Okay.
say 9 times out of 10, it's not.
Okay. And tewahedo or tiwahido? How do you say it?
Tawahado?
Tewahedo. What is tewahedo? Because I don't know any of these terms.
Yeah,
I I've probably listened to 15 hours of Ethiopian music off of Spotify, but I don't know what I'm listening to. It's just cool stuff, and it always says Ethiopian Mezmur Tewahedo music, and
yeah.
then
Tawahado is our endonym or our term of self-reference that we use,
okay,
and it refers to the Christological position of the so-called Oriental Orthodox Church, which I prefer to call the Afro-Asiatic Orthodox Church, because I tend to think of all of Christendom linguistically. I'm a language lover at heart. And so, for example, your tradition, and in fact, all of Protestantism,
hey, hit that like button.
to me, as an outsider, although I went to a Lutheran middle school and a Church of Christ college, I view all of Protestantism, and I know Anglicanism is very unique within that, but I view all of it as Germanic. And if you study, all of the places that are Protestant in the world have a Germanic language, whether it's English, German, or the Scandinavian tongues. and that's fascinating. And then the Catholics, their origin is the Latin language, although they had some very early Greek materials. It's the Latin. And then when you refer to the so-called Eastern Orthodox, right? Because Eastern and Oriental mean the same thing. It's really a misnomer, and it's really a silly way of classifying people. Because it's the same thing. It's like saying Western and Occidental, Eastern and Oriental. They're supposed to be synonyms: freedom and liberty, morals and ethics. But
Right.
the Eastern Orthodox, which are for me Greek Orthodox, right? Even though the Slavs were included beginning in the 900s, they came from the Greek Orthodox, and they all share the same rite, R-I-T-E, and it's the Greek rite of Constantinople. And so the Greek language is really the major deciding language. When it comes to our communion, it's Afro-Asiatic because the two first rites were Coptic and Syriac. The Copts originally used Greek, but so did everybody. They After Chalcedon and other church splits, they started using their own language, the Coptic language, even though their early fathers like Athanasius and Cyril of Alexandria wrote in Greek. They
Mm-hmm.
eventually used Coptic, which is their indigenous language, and those are the indigenous people of Alexandria. The indigenous people of Antioch in the east, of the Levant and Mesopotamia, they used Greek because it was a lingua franca, but their real language, the language of Jesus and the apostles, is Aramaic. And they found the literary form of Aramaic, which is Syriac. And I know you've had people who are familiar with the Syriac language and heritage on your program. I've had some on my program too, and it's crazy because they're split into like 8 different denominations or traditions. But that is the language of Jesus and the apostles, and it's the literary form of Aramaic. From there, it extended to Armenia and to us in Aksum, which is the old name of Ethiopia. And so you have Ge'ez, which is also an Afro-Asiatic language. It's a Semitic language. And then you have Armenian, which is an Indo-European language. However, geographically, Armenia is a part of the Caucasus Mountains. It's a part of West Asia. And so ours is the geographic church of Asia and Africa, to what I mean by Afro-Asiatic. And then the linguistic first rights, 75% of them are in the Afro-Asiatic language family. And so that's how I view us. If we had to talk about the Church of the East, they also use Syriac, but the Eastern dialect. And so I
Mm-hmm.
usually say, because what is Eastern Orthodox, Oriental Orthodox, Church of the East? You're using 3 different words for East. It's very confusing. I would call them the East Syriac. So I'm not, using the pejorative to talk about their Christology of Nestorianism or not Nestorianism, but referring to the language tradition they use, which they would share with the Chaldeans who are Catholic, is East Syriac, the Eastern dialect of Aramaic. And that's how I view all of Christendom. So if you go from east to west, East Syriac, Afro-Asiatic, Greek, Latin, and Germanic. And that's
Mm-hmm.
how I tend to view and present the tradition. But Tawahado is our native Semitic word that refers to those Afro-Asiatic Christians, those indigenous Christians of Africa and Asia, which later included the Indians of the subcontinent, although they were originally with the East Syriac. And so that tradition in India, in Egypt, in Syria, in Armenia, and in Ethiopia, that tradition, and of course now Eritrea, since they achieved statehood in 1991 to 1993, that tradition refers to itself in Ethiopia as tawahado, which means being made one, or it talks about the oneness of the one united nature of
Mm-hmm.
the divinity and the humanity of Jesus Christ in the one person of Jesus Christ.
Miaphysitism, right? That's
Miaphysitism is a Greek term that's transliterated into English. So our Ge'ez term for that is tawahado, and we haven't always called ourselves that. But in some local dialogue, especially around the 1800s, when some Christological issues were being raised, we kind of settled on that term. So over the past 200 to 300 years, we've settled on the term tawahado as a way of presenting ourselves, and it seems to have stuck.
interesting. Yeah, I admit Oriental Orthodox is a bit of a weird term to use. I'll use it because it's used in the literature and people talk about it. So, but I'll generally refer to it as just non-Chalcedonian. The Chalcedonian churches, the non-Chalcedonian, but the Afro-Asiatic may be a better way to refer to it.
That's my pet
Um,
project is to try to push that. Yeah, the
yeah.
non-Chalcedonian, the reason I try to avoid it, if you've ever read Elements of Style, the famous book in English from Strunk and White, it's uh it's better to present yourself affirmatively than negative. So I would like I use non-Chalcedonian as well, but I would prefer, for example, Miaphysite to non-Chalcedonian, and then to Miaphysite because it sounds so abstruse. I would prefer Afro-Asiatic, which is it sounds itself crazy, but at least you could kind of hear Africa and Asia in it, you know? Someone who has no
Right.
idea about theology, you say Miaphysite, they have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah, well, I guess Protestant is also kind of a negative term in the way because it's like protesting against the Catholic Church,
That's
and
right.
so
That's why I use the
maybe.
affirmative Germanic.
Yeah, but then it gets complicated because what do you do with like Calvinists? So like the whole Reformed tradition comes out of France, so that's more French than it is Germanic.
Is there literature in the French language?
Like everything Calvin wrote was in French.
Okay.
And so
That
then you
yeah.
also have like the Huguenots and stuff
Mm,
coming from France, and so
that's right. That does complicate it.
I mean it mostly works,
Yeah.
And then I guess it's a little funky when you're talking about Malankara because they were East Syriac Rite and now they're West Syriac Rite, but it's still Syriac Rite, you know, and so I don't know. It's but I like your term.
Thank you.
It's
Yeah, no, none of these terms are perfect, is what we're seeing. So
right. It's a very complicated history. Now you mentioned that Guz, am I saying that correctly?
that's correct.
Is it is Semitic,
That's
right?
right.
And the Ethiopian Church, y'all still follow a relatively kosher diet. Is that correct?
There's a lot of confusion around that, and so there
Yeah. So
are
help illuminate
yeah,
me because I'm very confused about all of it.
there are cultural practices, but none of that attains the dogma of the church, and let alone dogma, none of it is within the canon. So I'd say knowledge in the church is typically separated into three categories, what you could call dogma, canon, and then lowercase t tradition, which
Hmm.
said nicely, pejoratively, sometimes people will say old wives' tales. And so when it comes to, for example, honoring the Sabbath, before the Adventists ever existed, there were people in Ethiopia in I think the 1300s or 1400s who wanted to worship on the Sabbath on Saturday instead of Sunday, and they were very adamant about this, like the Adventists are. And it was mostly a monastic movement, but there were lay people involved, and an emperor, as a defender of the faith, because church and state were one at the time, decided on a compromise and told them to celebrate on Saturdays and Sundays. And so, it never became an official
Interesting.
teaching, but there is a practice to this day of sometimes we sound a little bit Adventist, but we're proto-Adventists in that way. And the compromise we made up is celebrate both days if you can, Saturday and Sunday, right? And meet as many times as you can is what I believe a paraphrase of what St. Paul said until Judgment Day. Um,
Is that liturgy both days,
yeah,
or like Vespers Saturday, liturgy Sunday,
the
like the
liturgy.
Russians do?
Liturgy both days. I mean, if
Okay.
it's the eve of a feast, you'll have both of those, the way you said it, like a vigil before. Um, but if you know anything about our vigil, the vigils are pretty hardcore. They're 3 to 4 times a month. They begin around 7 or 8 p.m., maybe 6 p.m. the night before, and they go till 6 a.m. the next day, which is when the Eucharistic liturgy will begin, and then culminate around 10 a.m.
Woo.
Yeah, that's about 3 to 4 times a month at all the major churches. If you're at a monastery, you'll have liturgy every day. So not just Saturday and Sunday, but liturgy every day. And in lieu of the instrumental music, which is called akwakwam, which means like a way of standing, or you could say choreography, in lieu of that instrumental music at the monasteries, depending on the monastery you go to, but the more, I'd say, older style monasteries are into just like the breviary or the liturgy of hours in lieu of, which is totally a cappella, right? So there's a total a cappella tradition outside of a bell we use a few times to signify moments. I believe your Malankara guest said the same thing. We have that in our tradition as well to signify certain key moments of the liturgy. Uh, but the liturgy of hours and the Eucharistic liturgy are a cappella, and then what is called akwakwam is an instrumental worship which is used in night vigils prior to major feasts.
But not at the monasteries.
It in some monasteries, but not all. There's a little bit of debate between the monasteries. There's
Oh,
diversity of
okay.
practice.
So in a normal Sunday liturgy, you would have some instrumentation, right? Like I've seen the drums.
No, and this is the complicated thing. Um, so in normal Sunday liturgy, if you have what's called a marigeta, which is a choir master, you would have instrumental worship that begins around 3 or 4 a.m. Sometimes they push it back to 1 a.m. With the Eucharistic liturgy always beginning at 6 a.m. if you have a choir master. There are many parishes that don't have a choir master. And so if you don't have a choir master, then you would never hit the drum. You would just go into the Eucharistic liturgy. You might do some pre-prayers for about an hour before at 5 a.m. Or if you stand the liturgy of hours like some parishes do, which is a different type of skill than the normal choir master, which is instrumental, then which would be like a liturgist, then you would maybe start the liturgy of hours at 2 a.m. and then start the Eucharistic liturgy at 6 a.m. And that's all a cappella. Um, However, there's the modern Mazmur category we talked about earlier. And so even if you're the most bare bones parish without the choir master, without the liturgist, so no liturgy of hours, no aquam, which is the instrumental worship, then you have this modern choir. And the modern choir would, after communion, be given some space and time to present worship with the drum. With the it's called I call it the Afroasiatic kettle drum. It's a hand drum with bigger on one side than the other.
Hmm.
And they hit it on
Some
both
of them
sides.
things were huge, and whatever the
Yeah.
church was, it was like big
Yeah.
giant drum. I'm
They're
like, man,
heavy.
that yeah.
It's a workout. It's a workout, especially when you're running around. So the modern choir will play some of their songs, but they're typically like their whole routine will be like 3 to 4 songs. It'd be like 20, 25 minutes. Whereas the traditional usage of the kabaro, as I just explained, it's like one song for hours.
Just one song, but that one you're not saying that one song lasts hours. You're saying one song within the course of hours?
Uh, See, this is where it's hard to explain. Like the mazmur, this is my musical deficiencies. The mazmur
Mhm.
traditionally is one song. Like it's one song assigned to a Sunday. Each Sunday is
Okay.
assigned that one song. But I don't know, like I'll be using like techno and house and trance language. It's like the lead up or the build up. I don't know what you'd call that. There are multiple names of sections which are the build up. For example, there's something called the melek, which is the
Okay.
image. It's the image of a saint, right? And so it's poetry written, let's say, let's take Jesus as a simple example, but it could be any saint. You say, "Oh Jesus, how great are your eyes? Oh Jesus, how great is your hair?" And I salute you, like in many ways, right? And it's rhyming poetry in Ge'ez, and it's very simple. Like again, I'm not the person to do this, but it'd be like Salam la zikra semeka, which is like salutations to the memory of your name. Oh Jesus Christ, you are like Joshua when he surrounded them. Da 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 da. Da. It's got this very quick melody. That's
Mhm.
called melek, and it's the image of a saint. Underneath that, there's something called the zik, which means like underneath it. Underneath that, they take some of the ideas from that and they kind of reframe it, reword it, and create a much longer, extended melody. There's another part called the abun. There's another part called the miltan. There's another part called ammalalas. And that like all are leading small parts that lead up to the one song of that Sunday.
Okay. And so how long in the traditional mezmur you have the melek, right? And
Yeah.
then underneath sort of an extrapolation from the melek where they're for lack of a better term, they're riffing on it for a
Yeah,
while,
yeah, that's a good way
right?
to say it.
Yeah. So how long does that one mezmur take?
Minimum 2 hours.
Minimum, and it's one song.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Interesting. And that's with what instrumentation? Just the drums? Or drums
Drum,
and harps and
no
electric
harp,
guitar?
no harp, no electric guitar. We have the sistrum, plural sistra, which is this ancient tool they used in ancient Crete or the Minoan civilization. And they also used it in ancient Israel. They also used it in the pharaonic worship, right? So it's kind of like a jangly thing. Have you ever seen it? It's like a stem with a round
I'm gonna Google it.
square thing.
CISTRA.
I think it's it could be that yeah, I think it's CISTRA, but it might be SIS, Sistrum and Sistra. And it's got little jangly clangs on
Oh,
it.
okay.
It makes
It's
it's
like a
almost like a
rattle.
it's like a rattle that almost makes a tambourine noise.
Okay. It's like the Coptics have their
The
symbol.
clanging cymbals. Yeah. Yeah, ours is like a rattle is a good way to say it. It gives it baby imagery, but it's as I said, used in Minoan, Jewish, and Egyptian civilizations of ancient times.
Hmm.
And then we have a walking stick as well that's used in the choreo. It's not just to hold you up. It's used in the choreography. So there's a choreography of the walking stick and which is called a makwamya, and the sanatsel, which is the sistrum. And there are a few different styles throughout Ethiopia of that. That itself is not standardized, although there are certain styles that are more popular. And then the kabaro or the drum, the hand drum, is hit in accordance to the movement of the sistrum.
Okay. So people are showing up, like the whole church, at 3 a.m. and they're liturgical dancing and playing the drums for 2 hours, and then you move into a cappella for like 5-6 hours, right?
I would say 2 to 3 hours.
2 to 3 hours.
Yeah.
Okay. And then at the end of that, then you have all the modern people
Yeah.
showing up doing their modern mezmur stuff, which is different,
Yes.
but also uses the drum.
Yes.
And that's like 20-30 minutes.
Yeah. And then that's also the time they would give a sermon in Amharic, which is the vernacular lingua franca of Ethiopia and the entire Horn of Africa. In Eritrean churches, they would give the sermon in Tigrinya, which is a language also found in Ethiopia, but it's the official language of Eritrea. Whereas
Do you have
everything
some?
else would be the same. In Eritrea, it would be Ge'ez language.
Mhm.
Everything else is the same.
Okay. Do people understand Ge'ez?
Most do not.
Okay.
Um, however,
This always strikes me as the weirdest thing. It's like, it seems like from the early days, all the Orthodox thought this needs to be understandable,
yes,
you know? And so because of that, in contrast to the Latin West, and in a way the Latin West was actually sort of doing it for the same reason, because there's so many dialects and so many languages. If they just have it in Latin, you can kind of begin to learn what it was, and at least the liturgies will be less adulterated over time. But in the East, it seemed like the East and the Orient, forgive me, in the Afro-Asiatic, churches,
yeah,
it seemed like they were a little more ready to put it into the colloquial languages. And so, they put it in Greek and Slavonic. They had it in Ge'ez, or is that how you
that's
say
right.
it?
That's right.
And then in Coptic. But then all of those languages got really old and nobody speaks those languages anymore. And now the Malankara, they don't understand what they're singing. The Ethiopians, you're
I
saying
want
they
to
don't
I want to
understand
couch
Guz.
our
Okay.
situation is a little bit different than the Malankara. For example, the Malankara have Malayalam and they have
Hmm.
Syriac, which are totally unrelated. Syriac is Semitic and from the Middle East, from Southwest Asia or West Asia, and Malayalam is Dravidic or Dravidian and it's from South Asia. So they're
Hmm.
totally unrelated languages. For us,
Fair enough.
yeah,
I mean that might not be the best example, but you
yeah,
can think Slavonic versus modern Russian. You can think
yes,
Koine Greek versus
that's
modern
better.
Greek.
That's
You can
better.
think Ge'ez versus Amharic. You
Yes,
can think Coptic versus Arabic, sort of. Although I know those are
kind of.
different.
The
You
dialect,
know.
the dialect of Arabic in Egypt is has, and people have done studies on this, a lot of Coptic words in it. However, their formal Arabic that they use doesn't as much. Um, so
Right. So
they
I'm
that
fascinated by why all these traditions. It's like, can is it just people begin to understand what was going on, or they're in like a different state of mystical contemplation the whole time? I mean,
it's
what
a little
level
bit
of
of both.
understanding is
Yeah,
there?
it's a little bit of both. So I think the ancient Greek to Greek, by the way, ancient Armenian to I forget the name of it, it starts with a G, to modern Armenian.
I should
To,
know because I just spoke to an Armenian, and
there's a different
it's
name
too
for
many
it.
foreign words that are
Yeah.
going around in my brain. I can't remember all of these.
The Church Slavonic to Russian, there I think you have a good comparison where I would say Amharic itself, it's hard to calculate, but somewhere in the picture of 30 to 50% of Amharic words are loan words from Ge'ez, you know? The way that Latin is the root of the Latin languages, right? It's like someone who speaks Italian, or they say Romanian is even closer than Italian, listening to like a traditional Latin mass, they're going to pick up more than someone who knows Chinese or an
Hmm.
Aboriginal language from Australia, you know? Like so there is some level of like the name of God, the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, the words for forgiveness, for mercy, for compassion, like all of those things um the Amharic speaker and Tigrinya speaker in Ethiopia and Eritrea would readily hear and understand.
Okay.
There are other tribes and languages, so I think your point stands that we could have been more apostolic in our reach, and people are doing more of that these days. However, I think there was like a great difficulty in the production of the sacred music tradition, and so that once it was established, people were afraid of like sacrilege or profaning the sacred music by translation. And it takes both linguistic knowledge and sacred music knowledge, which I think is a rare combo, to be
Hmm.
able to redo that tradition if you wanted to like replicate it in another language. I think the Copts are very ignorant, but I think they do a good job of switching it from what was Greek to Coptic, and then from Coptic to Arabic, and then Coptic to English. I think our melodies are slightly more complex, and I don't mean that pejoratively, but I do think they're musically more complex. And I think part of that is because we had more time to grow because we had our empire until 1974. We had, I mean, we still have self-rule, but we had a Christian state from the 300s AD till 1974. And so even after Constantinople fell, Ethiopia was a Christian empire for 500 years. So that gives you a lot of time to kind of be on your own and develop. Whereas a lot of our sister churches and other Orthodox churches, they were occupied by various Muslim regimes and caliphates and other groups. So
And just decimated. The Armenians decimated
so
the.
many times over. So I think we could have done more, but I think there was this trepidation of profaning and creating sacrilege because you'd have to either emulate that sacred music tradition in these other languages, which is very difficult, or you'd have to be seen as the innovator. And if you're seen as the innovator and they don't think the Holy Ghost is behind you, they might think you're trying to tear down the tradition by doing that. But there is a sort of regionalism the way that you said it, right? Within our right, we have Coptic, Syriac, Armenian, Ge'ez. So that's, and then more recently in Malayalam and in the vernacular Armenian, vernacular Arabic, Levantine and Egyptian, and then vernacular Amharic, Tigrinya. Oromo is another big tribe. So we have the Oromo language that people have been served in it, and a few other languages in Ethiopia as well.
Wow, I have so many questions. Um, is the liturgy now? It's a different liturgy, right? Than like the Coptic, which uses Cyril and Basil, or do y'all use the same liturgy as the Coptic? Because I know y'all are
Yeah.
sometimes kind of together and sometimes kind of not. I mean, you're in communion. I don't know the whole history of Egypt and Ethiopia, but just on the surface it seems like sometimes y'all are best buds and sometimes y'all are fighting.
Yeah, that's many such cases. There are sad arguments and fights over the Holy Church of the Sepulchre in Jerusalem, literally over some geography in the sacred space. We have fights over geopolitics and the usage of the Nile. Um, but yes, we are in the same communion, and we've always been in the same communion since Saint Athanasius the Great, who gave us our first metropolitan, who was from Tyre, actually, which is modern day Lebanon, the Eastern Mediterranean. And that was Frumentius, Saint Frumentius or Abbas al-Amma. I think he's venerated in other traditions as well. What that relationship looks like, I'll be frank, many people don't know. I don't know fully. There are weird gaps in the history, but
Mm-hmm.
it is clear from at least 1270 to about 1940s, 1950s, we had our bishopry and thus our liturgical rite from the Copts. We have major
Okay.
influences from the West Syriac and the East Syriac in our monastic tradition and in our biblical exegetical traditions, which are very plain to see, and the sources are there. Um, but liturgically, we're very Alexandrian. And so what is called in our tradition the Siratic Dasi, or the first half of the liturgy, is entirely Alexandrian. The
Okay.
second part of the liturgy is called the Akotet Kurban. The word Akotet is our transliteration of Eucharist. Kurban, you may have
Mm-hmm.
heard from other
It's
traditions
like
like the
holy
Qur'an.
offering or something like that.
Yes, it means a holy offering or like a cultic sacrifice. And so it means like a
And I
grain
think in
offering
some
or
English
animal.
translations they like don't translate that word when when Jesus uses it. It's like let it be korban.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it could be like a grain offering or an animal sacrifice if you're reading the Old Testament. But in the New Testament understanding, for us, it's the communion. And so the Akotit Kurban, or the Eucharistic sacrifice, is the portion of the liturgy that is called in English typically the anaphora. And the
Okay.
anaphora is all Eucharistic language. And so
Mm-hmm.
we have 14 anaphoras, which are in use in Ethiopia, which seem to be totally unique. I think one of them, I forget which one, was used by the cops until the 80s, but not anymore. And there's like recordings of them using it online, but not anymore. I don't know exactly why, and when they made their revisions. We have in our manuscript evidence something in the number of between 20 and 50 anaphoras. But in
Okay.
common usage and in the officially synod stamped liturgical texts, we typically have 14 anaphoras, which are local, although they have the names of all the saints. They're really local productions of Ethiopians, whereas the first part of our liturgy is very clearly Alexandrine.
Now the Latin liturgy and really all the Western liturgies that come from it, you could say are the liturgy of the Word and then the liturgy of the Eucharist. And that still I think that's basically common to all of the ancient liturgies, right? And so cuz that's the way that it is in the East. And so the anaphora would then if you viewed it that way, maybe that's a little anachronistic, I'm not sure, but if you viewed it that way, that would be the liturgy of the Eucharist, right?
That sounds
Versus the
right.
liturgy of the
That sounds
Word. So
right.
the
The
liturgy
liturgy of
of
the
the
word is the
Word would be the
readings, right?
same,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
The
that's right.
readings and the litanies and all of that that lead up to the point where they start the consecration.
Yeah, like who does what looks a little different, I've been to many Catholic masses. I've taught in Catholic schools. I've taught in Episcopal schools as well, by the way. So I
Mm.
have experience with that, and some of the words are verbatim. Like we lift our hearts up unto the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
That it is right, it is just. The peace be with you and with your spirit, which the Catholics used to say, and also with you, which is I think where Star Wars got that idea.
There's
But
a great John Mulaney bit about he hadn't gone to Catholic Mass in like a super long time, and they changed it back to "and with your spirit." And he
yeah.
said, "I came to church, and they said, 'The peace be with you,' and he said, 'and also and with your spirit.'" He's like, "Wait a second, that was the thing that you needed to change about the Catholic Church?"
Yeah.
you know, you know.
That's a funny one because I hear people saying that it's more dynamic to say the and also with you, but it's more faithful in a literal sense to saying with your spirit. And it's funny that that matches our tradition. What we say is end with your spirit. And so I've seen that and the litany and so many other things that where you intercede on behalf of like the whole world and you pray for the president and the prime minister, whatever. Like all those things, they seem very similar. And then our readings, I think the Catholic Church reformed their readings. I don't know how Anglicans do it, but we have a psalm, which is the only Old Testament reading, which is chanted and back and forth, led by the deacon, and then the people sing it back and forth. The first deacon leads that psalm chant and also reads from the Pauline epistles. Then the second deacon or assistant or associate deacon reads from the Catholic epistles or the universal epistles, and the second priest reads from the Acts of the Apostles, and then the first priest reads from the Gospel. And so you're typically supposed to have, for our liturgy to function, two priests, which is different than Copts who often have one, and three deacons, two deacons serving like in the liturgy of the word and the distribution of the Eucharist, whereas the third one is kind of there to hold an umbrella or to hold a wax candle and to do kind of other physical labor.
Interesting. So you don't have any Old Testament readings then in your liturgy?
Not unless it's Passion Week. In Passion Week, we probably read the whole Bible. But on normal Sunday liturgies, only the Psalm.
Okay. Do you read it other times liturgically other than Holy Week?
Um, yes, during the Liturgy of Hours or the Aquaquam, which is the instrumental worship, sometimes there will be places in which you read from like the prophets or something like that.
Okay, interesting. Now, what about those books that we don't have that y'all have, which are awesome, like the one whom you're named after, you know, uh, Henoch, right?
Yeah, that's right. Mas'afa Hanok, which is the Book of Enoch, or Mas'afa Kufale, which is the Book of Jubilees.
Right.
And then, of course, normal Septuagint books that everyone else has who has a Septuagint, or as some people call them, we call it Deuterocanon. Some people
Right.
pejoritize it as the Apocrypha. Um,
Anglicans have it. They
yeah.
they have it in their what you call lectionary.
And there are many Anglican, I don't know if they're believers or not, but Orientalists of the past few centuries who've written about it. So many people from the Anglo tradition have studied those texts as well. But yeah, we do have those books. When and where they were adopted is a more interesting case, but it seems like we kind of just drew upon the manuscript traditions of all of Christendom and we're very open-minded of the reception of these texts.
But when were they used? I mean, when are they used liturgically, or are they not really used
They're not really
liturgically?
used liturgically. They would be used in our exegetical tradition. So the early church had two main schools, which
Okay.
a friend of mine says it's blown up the feud between them, although uh,
Is this
most
like
people say it.
Antiochian Alexandrian?
Exactly. The school of
Okay.
Antioch and the school of Alexandria. I would say that we have our own school called the school of Aksum, and it's highly influenced, I think, by the school of Antioch. But it really its own tradition. And in those traditions, it's called Maz'af Bet or Tirgwame Bet. Maz'af means book or scripture, and Tirgwame means exegesis or interpretation. And so in the school of Aksum, uh, which is predominantly clergy, but you do not need to be ordained, but it is overwhelmingly clergy. Um, almost exclusively men, but there are rare women in history, and there are currently some women who study as well. And women cannot be ordained in our tradition. So um, this is like an example of how you don't have to be ordained to learn it. However, almost everyone is. They learn about the Old Testament, the New Testament. There's a book called the Book of the Monks, Matsafa Manokusat. There's a book called Matsafa Likawant, which are patristics. It's a group of gathering of. It's interesting. Monastic writings are separated from general patristic writings, um, and then and then you have the various exegeses or interpretations of the liturgy itself and of prayer books and other things. And so, um, and typically as a prerequisite to that, what I spoke about with our mutual Jonathan Pajot then would be poetry. You have to study Ge'ez grammar, which is in the Kenebet, or the House of Poetry. And if you want to, the second part of the grammar school is poetry. And you could study the poetry as well. Some often do. But the bare minimum is you study Ge'ez grammar in the poetry school. And then you go into the school of Aksum, which is the school of scripture and patristics. And so that's where you would study the Book of Enoch, the Book of Jubilees, and all these other books. And that would be specifically within the Old Testament school, which is one of the four schools or categories or sub-schools within the larger school of scripture and patristics.
So people are going to the Aksum school of exegesis for the sake of learning themselves, but also to exegete to a congregation?
Correct, for both. For
Yeah.
personal, for some, just for personal knowledge. And you'd be surprised how many people are just pursuing their curiosity. But yes, also some to teach. There's a weird disconnect. Um, it seems that sermons were sometime halted, and it's not clear for how long, for most Sundays. They were long time without homilies. And they were kind of restarted in the 20th century by one bishop named Abuna Melchizedek, who at the time was Abba Haptamariam, before he was a bishop. And he had a specific high role because he was the head abbot of the Holy Trinity Cathedral in the capital city, Addis Ababa, and the
Mm-hmm.
spiritual confessor of His Imperial Majesty, Emperor Haile Selassie, who is either venerated or worshipped by different groups of Rastafarians, and was the last, as far as I know, last Christian emperor in the world. And
What do you all think of him?
was ruling. People have mixed feelings. I like him overall. I'm a monarchist, so I like monarchy. I liked him. I had grandparents who served in his regime in different capacities. One grandfather of mine was an ambassador. The other was the hand of the governor or the kind of lieutenant governor of one of the states. And so I have very obvious connections to him, and I know people who are close to him and direct descendants of him and all that. Um,
So he wasn't heterodox.
no, he was Orthodox.
Just the people that followed him were
Some
like
people
some.
followed him in the Caribbean, and he sent priests and bishops to correct them with the Orthodox faith.
Okay, didn't even Bob Marley like at the end reject Rastafarianism? And wasn't he? Didn't he have like a true Ethiopian funeral?
Yeah, he did. And I know the priest, Father Amdas Ion Hamilton. He's still alive. He's in his 80s. He's a retired priest. He doesn't serve anymore, but he's African American and Creole priest um, in our tradition. And he was a poet. And so, actually, in lieu of a homily, he gave a poem. It's on my channel. He did a poem for Bob Marley. In addition to Bob Marley, we had other celebrities like Nina Simone and
Really, I didn't know she
yeah,
was Ethiopian Orthodox.
images of her online, and Miss Lauryn Hill, um, and obviously connections to the Marleys there, um, and other celebrities too. You know, the extent to which Nipsey Hussle, who passed in 2019, but the extent to which the Weeknd, who's alive now, Abel the Weeknd, he gave 50K to his mother's parish in Toronto. But the extent to which these people are convicted Christians living out a sacramental life is not really there. But it's nice to say as an oddity.
Right. Well, it just seemed interesting that Bob Marley was clearly Rastafarian. You would think if you are of a different religion, but you're getting a funeral as a Christian, there must have been some decision point in there.
Yeah, towards the end of his life, Abuna Yisak, who was his spiritual father, said that. And Abuna Yisak is the one famous bishop who, at one point, his diocese was the entire Western Hemisphere. And in the Caribbean and in North America, he baptized personally over 5,000 people. So he did great missionary work for our church. To this day, there was a church established in Trinidad and Tobago in 1952, where the parishioners are 99% locals, not
Mm-hmm.
Ethiopians at all. And there are still parishes in Jamaica, and of course in the United States, it's flourishing as well. That did outreach to the African diaspora in the Caribbean and the African Americans in the United States as well. We could have done a lot more if we were single-minded in the mission of Abu Ishaq, who wanted everything to be in local languages, which is English. See, he didn't necessarily, and this goes to your debate from earlier, he didn't translate the liturgy into patois and the various creoles, right? So there's another debate. Like, do you translate it into a pidgin language, right? Or do you keep it to the
Right.
standard? Because if we took your argument from earlier, theological limit, you would do the liturgy in pidgin, which, by the way, some people who speak pidgin and creole and patois are offended by that because they feel like you're profaning it for them. Others do like it, and there's like a Hawaiian pidgin New Testament. But you read it and some people laugh because most pidgins and creoles are not meant to have a high literary form. They're meant
Mm-hmm.
to be spoken only. And so there are debates even within communities that speak that about whether to use the standard Elizabethan English even. There's some Jamaicans who prefer Elizabethan English, to their own patois for the liturgy because it feels more venerable to them. And those emotions, they could be examined philosophically if to see whether that's the right thing. But it's not obvious. It's not always so obvious when and where to translate a sacred music tradition and how the people would respond to it.
So you keep talking about the poetry tradition, right? And
Yeah.
so listen. So if I'm remembering correctly, off of the podcast that you did with Jonathan, there is an Ethiopian tradition of poetry which is super intense, where you study for years in order to master the language and the grammar, and that in some of these big cathedrals, you would have a full-time poet,
Yes.
and all he does is write a some poetry for that Sunday that then will never be sung again,
Correct. And
unless it is.
your writing is like, how do I say this? If they even find out you wrote it, it's frowned upon. The idea is that you do it all in your head. Now, some people might write it in secret, but no one will ever see that writing. Unless there are some people who are modernists who try to make books for the purposes of preserving the art, where they'll compile the poems of other people. But almost never does a person themselves like compile their own poetry and write it and publish it. It's very ephemeral the way that you said it. It's said once. It's supposed to be thought of in your head. They call it counting. You see them on their fingers because the poetry is all to be sung. So it has to have the criterion of uh like it doesn't rhyme, but sometimes it can, but it has to have the criteria of being like Christological or about one of
Okay.
the saints. But then it also has certain musical requirements. It has to hit certain musical notations. And so
How
they're
so?
trying to count the melodies in their head so that it could be sung. And so they'll
Okay, is it like
switch
a
the
certain
words around.
number of syllables?
Uh, See, I don't know enough about the music tradition to say it could be syllables or something, but yeah, there's certain letters and words when combined lend themselves to be elongated or shortened in the melody tradition. And so that's what
Okay.
they're counting, and they do a lot of that in their head, like in private.
Okay. And how long would a poem go, for example?
It would be pretty short. The longest ones might be about 10 minutes, like the longest ever, like 10, 15 minutes. But there could be some that are 5 minutes or less.
And the person is just going to services and writing this poem all week, or
Yeah.
writing this poem all week.
Yeah. Yeah. They could be doing other functions in the church as well. Like they often will have sacred music knowledge as well. There are some people that might only be a poet, but they often have other skill sets as well. And they'll be like
Okay.
standing in the circle where the akwam or the instrumental traditional music is happening. And then when it's their time to do the poem, they'll come up and they will recite the poem verbally from memory, and a person will stand in front of them, and the person standing in front of them will sing the poem. And that person has never heard the poem before.
Interesting. Is the melody totally set, or is it somewhat improvisatory?
The melody is supposed to be pretty set, and that's what they're working out in advance to make sure that it works. Sometimes they'll
Okay.
improvise if the person made a mistake in how the melody is supposed to be. So that's when the
Okay.
improvisation, and they might make them change like a word or two so that it could work better for the music.
Interesting. So they might spend 20 hours that week, or 40 hours that week on this poem. I mean, how
I
much time are
I
you
I
talking
I
on?
don't I don't think they take that long, but yeah, maybe a few
Okay.
hours, maybe a few hours. It depends on the person really and their capacity.
Okay, interesting. But some have been written down because you have a
Yes,
tradition of it,
correct.
right? So how were those written down? Someone just thought that was good, and they had a phenomenal memory and remembered all of it.
So yeah, there's when you go to the Abanet school or the House of Poetry, the Beit Qini or the Qini Beit, um, they will have like usually a book that's handwritten by the master or professor of poetry at that site. And that handbook is how they learn. And so as I said, the first half is all about grammar. So that's really written. And then the second half is the rules of poetry. That's also written, the rules of poetry. And then within that, they'll have some sample poems in there. So there's like a famous one that everybody says. Again, I will butcher this, but for example, they'll say, Rabbi sagada b'manfak alelit ila Rabbi akonu asbait imna asbait ya Abbi. So then that's how they say it. They'll sing it, and again, I'm gonna butcher it, but I'll butcher it for your sake. ربي سجد بمنفك ليليت لربي أكون أصبحت من أصبحت يا عبي. And this is like a learning instrument, and the poem is like, how could a rabbi prostrate or bow down before another rabbi? And they say the same way a finger could prostrate or bow down to a finger. And so if you look at your hand, the thumb kind of controls the rest of the fingers. The
Mm-hmm.
same way the poem, the kind of Christological meaning is that the same way that the thumb is the boss of your other fingers, both Nicodemus and Jesus were considered rabbis. However, the one rabbi, Nicodemus, went to the other and bowed down to him or prostrated to him by becoming his student and the other becoming his master. And so that's like a considered the most basic poem. And that one is kind of preserved in the singing and the written tradition. And they'll make you like memorize that, and then they'll teach you more advanced stuff, and then you're supposed to create new Ge'ez every day, which is why sometimes I say like, Ge'ez is not a dead language, because there are tens of thousands of people in these schools in Ethiopia creating new sentences, and not just like random sentences, but creating poetry every day in this language. And every weekend that poetry is being presented.
Wow.
And now it's being live
Interesting.
streamed on YouTube.
But this would just be in Ge'ez,
Yes,
not in. Okay.
correct.
Do they ever translate any of it?
Not the singing, but the Amharic has something called Samana work, which is wax and gold, and it's been written about in English a lot. And so when they teach Amharic, they will have Amharic poems that use a lot of what is called wax and gold, where the outer layer is a gilded layer, and it's the facade, or the first layer of the double entendre or triple entendre, and then the gold is what you find. Excuse me, the wax is, I said gilded, but it's wax on the outside, gold on the inside. So the gold is being hidden by wax. Almost like I think Jewish people do this on Hanukkah with the dreidels. They have the chocolate, which is like wrapped up in something, but like it's
Mm-hmm.
like gold on the inside, wax on the outside. So the outer meaning or the first meaning of the double entendre, and then the hidden meaning is the gold or the true meaning of the double entendre, what they were hinting at. Like the one I just gave you that's talking about a hand and fingers, but ultimately it's talking about Jesus and Nicodemus.
You brought up that it's similar to a Jewish thing as well, and we talked about the it's not really kosher, although a lot of Ethiopians do eat kosher,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And aren't there more ritual purity laws that have probably been handed down from ancient Semitic tradition into Ethiopian than there are in other
Yeah,
Afro-Asiatic churches?
I think our veneration of the Ark of the Covenant, our claim for it being in Aksum, and the replicas of it we have in every church. Although our replicas don't have Ten Commandments on it, our replicas have the name of Jesus, to whom all tongues submit and all knees bow. Um, I think that
Interesting.
is our most Jewish part. I mean, we are more almost exclusively circumcised. I told you about the Sabbath thing. We don't eat pork and shellfish. Typically, it's just not in our diet. You know, there are no indigenous Ethiopian foods that have that. And the
So it's
main,
not forbidden. It's just not.
it's not dogmatically forbidden. It's not canonically forbidden. The people just don't do it. And then the people confuse often their culture with their religion.
Alcohol, because I know Coptics don't drink alcohol at
We
all.
drink alcohol.
But
We're not prudes
okay.
about that. And in fact, there's one monastery my friend visited that's home to the Garima Gospels, which are fourth century illuminated gospel manuscripts, the Garima Gospels. It's called Inda Garima, which is the Garima is one of the nine Greco-Syrian saints who visited us. And his monastery in the region of Tigray, my friend who lived there for 4 years and held the Garima Gospels, said almost as a test to see if you are Protestant or Pentecostal, they give you moonshine beer. And he says actually there they exclusively drink moonshine beer because the water is actually not healthy. And so I
Interesting.
don't know how they do that, but often, they'll eat once or twice a day in and out of fasting and feasting seasons. So they,
Well, a
they
lot
live
of
very
Europe,
simply.
you just drank beer all the time because the
Yeah.
water wasn't
So that's
good.
that's a common thing? You could survive that way?
And there's some like argument that in a lot of ancient Semitic cultures they drink wine all the time, and that in various places that the water wasn't very good. So it was actually like a way of purifying the water was to mix wine with the water so that the alcohol would kill whatever germs are in the water. So it's like you were drinking a really diluted wine all the time.
Yeah, so we're not prude that way. Some people will cut it out during the fast, but it's not a requirement of the fast.
Okay, and you said that Ethiopians tend to be circumcised, but is there like a ritual circumcision?
No.
Is like a okay, it just is culture.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. And the Ark of the Covenant is super interesting because everyone thought, do the Ethiopians really have the Ark of the Covenant? And they're like, there's no way they really have the Ark of the Covenant. And evidently, there was some document that was just leaked from the CIA in some batch of leaked documents that said, yeah, the Ethiopians really have the Ark of the Covenant.
There you go.
Yeah. So, isn't there just this has nothing to do with the musical tradition, but it is fascinating. Isn't there like one monk who stands outside of that chapel like with a machine gun and doesn't allow anyone in? And then
Yeah.
once he's posted there, he'll never leave for the rest of his life, but they usually like die early because there's a lot of radiation coming from the Ark of the Covenant. How much of this is just nonsense that people say and how much of this is true?
Yeah, I've heard some of that before. I've heard many of them go blind. I don't know if it's from the radiation of the arc or if it's from other practices. I don't know if he has a machine gun. I've never seen him have a machine gun.
Okay.
But you might not need it. The city of Aksum is considered like a holy city in the way that a lot of people in the West I think don't understand anymore. I mean, the Vatican might be the equivalent of it, but I'd really compare it to like the way Mecca is built. We had a secular dictator, Prime Minister Medlis, from the 90s till about 2012, and someone was begging to build like a mosque in Aksum. And there are some Muslims in the general area, but I believe to this day there's not one mosque. Someone could correct me on that there. And he said, you know what, you could build that there when you allow us to build a church in Mecca. And so even this secular atheist Marxist guy, when it came to that city where some of his family is from, he didn't play any games. And
Hmm.
so the people themselves would act as a mob, you know, for better or for worse, and probably attack you. So I'm saying you don't need a machine gun. Like the city itself would is almost like a Venus fly trap. Like the city of Aksum itself is its own self-defense mechanism.
Interesting. Some of that sort of mob justice that would take place.
Yeah, like the tar and feathering in the early American Republic.
Well, I knew a buddy, and he said that he was in a Guatemalan village, and some drunk guy ran over a little kid, and then later that night, the village took care of that guy.
Yeah,
I'm like, woo, okay, okay
yeah.
then. That's
If you know the
dark.
geopolitics strategist Edward Lutwak, he talks about that. He lives somewhere in the jungles of like I think Bolivia, somewhere
Mm-hmm.
in Latin America, and he actually likes it for that reason. There's a difference between anarcho-tyranny, some of which you see in Los Angeles right now, where my family's from, versus like these places. When you're in the outskirts, it's a true anarchy. And so in anarcho-tyranny, you're punished for taking justice into your own hands for being a vigilante. And at the same time, you're not being protected by whoever the security forces are. But in those rural outskirt blackout areas, it's a real anarchy where no, you're allowed to be a vigilante.
Yeah, interesting, interesting. You were talking about people went to Aksum for the tradition of exegesis, right? So I had two more questions about that because
Yeah.
you said they learned the exegesis for personal. I don't like the term curiosity, but
Consumption?
sure, and but also to exegete it. Now I
Yes.
know that in times past, but you said there are no ordained women, which is pretty universal in the
Yeah.
all of the Orthodox world, except once upon a time there were Syriac deaconesses, and evidently now there's like a Greek deaconess somewhere in Africa that everyone's all up in arms about. But as far as the exegesis, you said it's almost all ordained people, but women could go there to study.
Yeah, there are
Would
a few
women
women. There are a few
would
women.
women then publicly exegete the scriptures?
They would not publicly exegete in a church, but they could open up what's called their own Abbanet school, and they could then teach women.
Okay, but not men.
Um, it's complicated.
I'm not
Yeah,
judging. I'm
no, no,
just
no.
I'm just asking. Yeah.
I think it's complicated. I think theoretically they could, but I've never seen that. What I have seen is, for example, the administrator of the church I grew up at in Los Angeles, he learned the poetry from a nun. So he learned poetry and singing from a nun. So I've seen them teach men poetry and singing. I've never seen a woman teach a man scripture, but I've seen
Oh,
them
okay.
teach liturgy and I've seen them teach poetry.
Because I feel like there's plenty of Russian Orthodox nuns who people would who would like teach a little bit, and people would listen to it and
Yeah,
not
and
think twice
I'm
about it.
I'm a big fan of Dr. Eugenia Constantinou, who's also a presbytera. She's a priest's wife in San Diego, and I've corresponded with her before, and I've seen her read in the Greek Orthodox Church, and I've seen her teach as well. And she's a very famous teacher, and she translated this ancient commentary of the Book of Revelation by Saint Andrew of Caesarea, which is the oldest commentary on Revelation. And so, I've obviously seen her do those things, and I haven't seen anyone
Yeah,
prevent her, and her husband is a priest, you know? So I don't know.
yeah, yeah. Interesting. And so but then there's no woman deaconess in the
No,
Ethiopian tradition,
absolutely
or
not.
at any point in history.
Absolutely not. I mean,
Okay.
maybe in the early days they said for helping with baptism, you know?
Yeah, that's basically what it was in the Syriac tradition, if I understand correctly.
Yeah, but
I mean, there were
nothing in
some
our
places
normal.
where they went behind the altar, but it was to help the distribution of communion in convents, and it was almost always like an abbess of a convent who
Yeah.
was,
We
yeah.
have some nuns and abbesses who are involved with like maybe the preparation of the communion or something like that in some places.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
but that's it. I mean, they would not enter themselves.
Right. A couple other non-musical questions. You're talking about Eritrea.
Yeah.
We talked about the Egyptian-Ethiopian relation. What's the difference between Eritrean and Ethiopian? Because over here, sometimes you'll see Ethiopian Eritrean restaurant.
Yeah. Functionally, there's no difference. That's going to upset a
Okay.
lot of people. If we're talking about the church, there's functionally no difference. They achieved statehood, um, arguably in the modern sense, for the first time uh, in 1991, freedom from communist state, which had encompassed Ethiopia and Eritrea, and 1993, their proper government started. They've had the same president since 1993, and they've never had elections since. And the future political status is not clear. People don't understand this until you study other places. But for example, um, there was the artificial republic of Afghanistan that when the US troops left, it's now in the Taliban's hands again. And so people are starting to study USAID and other uh, covert operations of the US federal government, which is
Mm-hmm.
behind the creation of many pseudo states. If you look at Somalia, our neighbor, it's a very similar situation. There's a republic in Mogadishu where if the US federal government totally left, it would collapse the way that the Afghanistan one did. And I'm not saying that that would happen in Eritrea, but nobody knows. Nobody knows. And they have a plethora of different beliefs within themselves and amongst each other, and they don't agree. And I'm not going to make any statements on what's going to happen in their future. But I just want to say it's a very early state. And for example, the exegetical tradition is still virtually identical. They still sell Amharic books. Amharic is not in any capacity an official language in Eritrea today. They still
Mm-hmm.
sell books in Amharic in Eritrea. The people there still know Amharic, many of them. And sometimes they get TV, children's TV broadcast. Sometimes they listen to songs and secular and church songs. So they're still in the sphere of influence of Ethiopia. And if we talk about outside of the exegetical tradition, the liturgical tradition is all in Ge'ez, and so it's still the same. And the major centers of learning are almost exclusively in what's called the Amhara region or the
Okay.
Amharic speaking region of Ethiopia. And there was not one point in their independence from 93 till today where scholars were not crossing the border to Ethiopia to go learn in the Amhara region of Ethiopia.
Okay.
They never stopped.
What is the current politics of Ethiopia right now? Isn't there a lot of
It's very
chaos
messy. How
and
much time do you have? To keep it simple, there
because
is,
I don't really know. I mean, you're talking about the communist era of
yeah,
of Ethiopia. I mean,
that's from the 70s to the 90s.
from the 70s to the 90s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Forgive me for
from
not
no
knowing
problem.
more about that, but
From
was
the
that under the
90s,
Soviet Union?
it was in bed with the Soviet Union. Yeah, it was a probably a puppet of the Soviet Union. But it was being
Okay.
fed by both sides, by the Americans and the Soviets. And the Americans might have been the ones to have sparked the revolution. It's not clear. The guy who took over was trained at one point in the United States. And so that's at
Hmm.
least suspicious at a kind of surface level. How deep into a conspiracy and how planned that is, it's very hard to prove, you know? And a lot of this is soft power. But there was hard power involved behind the scenes as well. It was a site of the Cold War, just like Vietnam and other places.
Okay.
Um, from the 90s, Ethiopia has been run by what's called a federal democracy, and it's based off of a pseudo-linguistic identification of ethnic group. And that has been balkanizing the country since the 90s. Its main ruler died in 2012, and the party of that ruler tried to hold on to power for the next 6 years with puppets. And in 2018, he was overturned after a series of protests, and he was of the Tigrinya speaking background. Uh, from
What was his name?
Meles Zenawi.
Okay.
And then, like I said, there was a sock puppet in between. Um, and then Abiy Ahmed, the current ruler, took over in 2018. And he was unelected at first, but appointed by parliamentary politics. And then he won one election recently, but uh, not every region was included, and there are multiple civil wars going on since 2020, which is when he abolished elections in 2020 for the
Mm.
sake of COVID. So using COVID as an excuse. And so it's a complicated situation since then. And he's got one front in the Amhara region, one front in the Tigray region, and he's threatening to take the port of Eritrea because Ethiopia is currently landlocked. So he's
Wow.
opening up like a three-front war, and he's being backed by the Emiratis, the UAE, and the Turks in Turkey, by Erdogan and a few other people. So it's kind of a complicated thing. His father was Muslim. His mother was Orthodox Christian. He's personally evangelical of the prosperity gospel variety. And
Okay. What a
yeah,
what a mix.
yeah. So he's got an interesting mix.
Sounds like you're not a fan.
I'm not a fan, and he at first united this and resolved a dispute that was, and I have to give him credit for that, within the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. He had resolved the dispute that was with Eritrea, but the issue is he doesn't stay consistent. So after he did that, he then created disputes within the Orthodox Church, and then he created disputes with Eritrea. So had he stuck with his first few actions, I think me and many other people would be supporting him. But he's gone
Okay.
back and forth. He's kind of pragmatic in that way to what suits him. He plays America and China off of each other, even Russia. He went to go meet the new pope. Like he's a very crafty guy. He speaks multiple languages, and he was an intelligence agent under the Tigrinya speakers. He's mainly from Oromo, which is a Cushitic language, and a Cushitic language background. But he speaks Amharic and Tigrinya as well.
Interesting. And how is all of that related to the Ethiopian church at the moment? Is the
So
Ethiopian church
currently,
relatively united or
it was relatively united, and he did help that, as I said initially. But for example, he's been supporting break off bishops and anti-popes who were active in the name of this linguistic diversity, which you spoke of earlier, while work on that linguistic diversity was happening. And so, really, it's a political project of balkanizing Ethiopia, turning it into Yugoslavia, the way there are five, six states that come out of Yugoslavia. He wants to do that, it's seemingly, with Ethiopia, or to craft it into the spitting image of the cultural region that he came from, where they speak Oromo. And so he has placed his own men at the position of administrative positions, executive director of the synod, uh, scribe of the synod, and archbishop of the capital city. So he just did that recently this month, and so he is meddling uh, in the affairs of the Orthodox Church. At the same time, there are Orthodox Christians being killed where they are minorities in other states because of this system of linguistic federalism. If you're not the original language of that state, they consider you almost as a second class citizen. Whereas historically in Ethiopia, you could go wherever you want in Ethiopia and you're still a first class citizen.
interesting?
It'd be as if
Is
each state in the United States had a different language.
mhm. Is the majority of Ethiopia Christian?
The majority is Christian, about 50 to 60%. The numbers are hard to get. In the historic areas, it's Orthodox. In some of the southern, western, and eastern areas, you have some Protestants, and you have some Catholics too, more Catholics in Eritrea because they were an Italian colony. Um,
Okay.
but yeah, different types, mostly Pentecostals, but there are some Anglicans because we had British aid in World War II and they established themselves, and some Lutherans and some Adventists through American missionaries, and some Swedish Protestants as well. But
Interesting.
mostly Orthodox, and then the 40% or so is about 30 to 40% is Sunni Muslim with some Sufis.
In your opinion, why is it that Pentecostalism is so big in Africa?
I do have Pentecostal friends, and they'll be upset at me when I say this, but I think it.
I grew up Pentecostal,
Oh,
so
did you?
no
Okay.
worries.
It plays to, I think, emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times you see a lot of women being drawn to that. Um, and it's a different way of being. And in general, it presents itself as simpler, you know? The fasting, the dietary stuff, the judgment that comes with it, the ask for modesty and how you present yourself. Some of their places look like great fashion shows, and certainly more cleavage there than you'll see in the Orthodox Church, amongst other things. Tight clothes and other things like that. Just simply would be unthinkable, let alone head coverings and other things that we have. So it presents itself as more easy. It presents itself as more modern, and the Orthodox Church is backwards. And so if you want to be more assimilated to Western culture, more American, that's another thing. Like, you seem to be a person of the future, a person of the present and the future rather than a person of the past. And so those are different reasons, I think, why it's growing. I do think ultimately it will not continue to grow. I think it's a fad, and I see that with some of the second, third generations of people in that tradition. So we'll see where it is in 50 years.
Interesting. I mean, personally, I'm of a little bit of a divided mind in that I think Pentecostal is way better than pagan or non-Christian. I mean, I would much rather
I
be
would
a
have to agree.
Pentecostal.
I'd have to
You
agree.
know, but it does irk me when Pentecostals go places that are Orthodox and
Yeah,
start converting Orthodox. Like,
that's the
that
worst.
really irks me because I'm
Yeah.
like, come on, man, they're Christian. Like, what are you talking? Like,
Here's where
you
I
don't
like
even know
begin
what
with.
you're arguing against them about.
Oh, it's
What
annoying.
is
It
this?
becomes, I grew up in parts of LA where the Mexicans would say, "Are you Catholic or are you Christian?" And that frustrates me. So you see, like, you rejected the term Protestant earlier, but they'll just like reject a term. They don't even know the word Protestant, and they'll just consider Protestants to be Christians and
Mm-hmm.
Catholics to be some other thing. And then that dynamic
I
is
grew
like
up like that. I
copy
mean,
and
I was.
pasted to Ethiopia with, "Are you Orthodox or are you Christian?" And it's like, are you kidding me?
Yeah, that's so ridiculous. Yeah, I mean, because I grew up Pentecostal, but I went to an independent fundamental Baptist school, which was very. If you're not independent fundamental Baptist, you might as well not read the Bible. You know. Um. So let me ask about the tattoos. Because I see all these pictures where people have like Ethiopians have
Yeah.
tattoos on their faces and on their foreheads, and is that ubiquitous or
It's ubiquitous in rural areas, especially amongst women.
okay?
It's dying out now, and especially in the urban areas, you don't really see it. Although now you're seeing modern tattoos from people. Some of it seems to be pre-Christian. Like, some of it are like suns, the sun and other stuff like that. Whereas some of it are like crosses. And then my own great aunt, she had traditional tattoos of crosses all around her neck, but then she went to Jerusalem and got the Madonna uh, right on her arm in a modern tattoo as well.
Okay,
So, and she was in her 80s.
that's
Um,
awesome.
yeah. So I think some of those tattoos are pre-Christian
Hmm.
leftovers and remnants, and they seem to be made with different types of dyes and things like that. But some of them
Maybe
are
baptized
crosses.
into Christianity.
Exactly. Some of them are crosses on the forehead or on the chin or on the neck, and it's typically the women.
Okay, men don't typically have cross tattoos.
No, and some of the clergy you'll see sometimes will have a cross, uh, or on their forehead or more commonly on their hand. And those are people who usually visit Egypt, where that tradition exists in Egypt.
Yeah,
And so they pick
I
it up
love the
there.
Coptic cross on the wrist thing.
Yeah,
It's it's so awesome. It's like
yeah. They're
no,
ready to die.
it's like, no, we will not deny that we are Christian, and you're born Coptic, you're not going to be able to deny that you're Christian either.
Yeah,
And so, it's
exactly. And so that's a more cosmopolitan cleric who maybe has visited Egypt would do something like that. But it's typically the women.
okay. Now back to the music. How much of the music is done by the choir master, as you said, and how much of it is congregational? Because there at first I thought, before I started really talking to a bunch of people, that the Orthodox, like basically all of the Orthodox churches, have a different mentality when it comes to congregational singing. That congregational singing is basically a Protestant thing. And then the Catholics basically later adopted it because they were like, hey, everybody in the Protestant church is enjoying, singing, so we should do it. And then because of my experience in the OCA, which, there's a choir up there singing,
Yeah.
but basically the congregation doesn't sing anything. They're just kind of standing there, which is fine. I mean, it's like the angels and mystical contemplation around the throne. I have no problem with that. But then starting to learn about these other traditions, Carpatho-Rusans, everybody is singing their hearts out and improvising harmony the whole time. And in the Malankara tradition, everything is in like sevens and fives and in these melodic formula that everybody can sing along. And congregational singing is a huge thing. The Coptics have these surprisingly, like snake-like melodies. That's probably not a good term for it, but where they're circling around everything and have tons of ornamentation. And I've seen in congregations, everybody's singing along, So what is it like in the Ethiopian tradition? Is it more the choir master or a choir, or is it congregational, or...
So it's typically the choir master and the choir, and I would say the Ethiopian tradition traditionally is very elitist. So, for example, the Protestant thing that you're saying, especially all of the separationists who are also called congregationists. So rather than the Virginia and the Carolinian Church of England tradition, the Northeast Boston tradition, they're literally called congregationalists. And it's in generally, you see these ideas of democracy and things like that. The Ethiopian church is fundamentally way more hierarchical. And so
Okay.
if we're talking about Akwakwam, which is again the traditional instrumental worship, or the liturgy of hours, it's almost always just the clergy and who are called the deptera. Excuse me, the deptera are like cantors,
Mm-hmm.
and almost always they were at one point clergy, but sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're active clergy, sometimes they're inactive clergy,
Okay.
right? Um, and there are many different reasons for that. But the choir master and the deptera, or the choir that's with him, which is not made up of normally like the laity, but these highly trained musicians, would be the main ones, especially singing the Aqua, and almost always exclusively men. With the
Okay.
liturgy of hours, people might know some of the parts a little bit more, but almost nobody knows those parts. The Eucharistic liturgy, there is explicit expectation that the congregation participates. You'll find
Okay.
many places where the congregation just doesn't know it as well, but almost always there are certain key points of the liturgy that the people do know. For example, 15 times they're told, "Arise for prayer, Lord have mercy on us," in melody. So the deacon says, "Tansa Allo, that's arise for prayer." And everyone responds, "Exio tasa Helena, Lord forgive us." The priest says, "Salah amela kullakamu," and everybody, which is peace be with you all, everybody responds, "Mislaman fasika," and with your spirit. Every that happens 15 times. There's a part right before the communion takes place, and right before the communion takes place, there I think is 42 times. There's a back and forth in different melodies. The shortened form, the priest goes, Exio Maharana Christos. And the people respond, Exio Maharana Christos, which is the Jesus prayer. It's the prayer of the publican. Lord, have mercy on me. It's literally,
Mm-hmm.
Lord Christ, have mercy on us. That's how we say it in Ge'ez. But it's the publican's prayer from the Gospel of Luke, and it's the Jesus prayer that the Hesychasts in the Greek and the Egyptian desert tradition say. It's Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. That's our version of it. Everybody knows that. There are huge swaths of the Eucharistic liturgy which people don't know, and so they don't respond to the parts that they don't know. But I would say there are certain key moments, like those moments, that they're expected to
Okay.
respond, and they do respond. But certainly the Aquaquam and large parts of the liturgy of hours, they don't.
Interesting. And when the women do the super high,
The
you know that thing.
ululation, yeah.
Yeah.
The ululation. In Arabic, it's called zagruda, yeah. That's universal amongst the Afro-Asiatic.
Yeah. When does that come in?
Uh, Especially when the Ark of the Covenant replicas go in their procession. That will happen. But it might be during a sermon, or it might be during the climax of the Aquam tradition. So as it's progressing through the many parts, the end of it is called Ammalalis, and some people go into something called Chebchebo. The Chebchebo is extremely fast, right? That, like, it gets that fast. The Ammalalis is faster than all the other parts, but slower than that, where it'd be like Aman ba mane aman ba mane. So in the middle of that, they might ululate or say elil,
Okay. Interesting.
because they start to know that, because then it becomes the same words repeated, you know. So they'll say, for example, uh, we had Pentecost most recently, but let me go to the Ascension. On the Ascension, they would say Man sebata irgatu. The glory of his ascension is marvelous. And the people could hear that. And not all of them know exactly what it means, but they could make out the words where they can and others, and some of them know what it means.
Okay. The ululation. What does it mean? What?
It's
Why?
it's just an expression of joy. And it's so ancient, and it's so part of us, and it's so Semitic. It's like pan-Semitic. It's in the Bible too, I think. It's like it's a form of expressing joy. I'd heard at one point
Okay.
from some Egyptian friends that there was, I think the former pope had prohibited in the church because they thought it was too worldly, but they were doing it at weddings and outside. In the Ethiopian church, we do it everywhere, but especially the church. And it's like the
Okay.
idea is men are supposed to clap and women are supposed to ululate.
So women don't clap.
They do too. Like there's no, I mean,
Oh,
there's no
okay.
like, what's the enforcement mechanism, you know?
Yeah. Interesting.
It's like
Okay. Yeah. And
the people online, what is it called? The Paran's position. People argue about this all the time.
Orans. Yeah.
Orans, you see all the old Ethiopian women. Technically speaking, in our tradition, and I think in the West and in the East and all over, the priest is supposed to do this, right?
Yeah.
All the Ethiopian old women do this, especially in this solemn beginning where they say, Ahaduab Kadus, one is the Father, or only the Father is holy, only the Son is holy, as only the Holy Spirit is holy. It's one of the solemn beginnings of our Mass. It's from the Alexandrian tradition. They do it in the Coptic as well. But in ours, it's like an extra reverent time. The women are all frozen in the Oran's position. What is the priest going to go like smack the hands of all the old women? Like there's no enforcement mechanism. They're all doing it and it's all wrong. And what are you going to do about it?
Yeah. Like in some Russian churches, you were not supposed to prostrate on Sunday.
We prostrate all the time.
But in a lot of Russian churches, they're like, "Yeah, it's Sunday. We're going to prostrate." What do you mean don't prostrate?
Yeah.
And it's like, what are you going to do? Like,
Mhm.
they're
Oh, I
prostrating.
didn't know that. So they rebel against that.
Yeah, and so it's like a supposedly that's like a Russian thing. In the OCA, it's like all converts, so they're going to do everything like the correct way. So
By the book, yeah.
and so that you don't see people prostrating on Sunday. But from what I've been told, if you go to like a Rokor church, it would not be uncommon to see everybody prostrating on a Sunday. So it just depends on,
I've
I
heard of
guess,
some
local
prohibitions.
tradition.
Ours is not on Sundays. There's some time, I think, during Holy Week or something that they say not to, and people argue about it every year, but everybody just prostrates.
Okay, so the ululation is sort of like like Amen,
Yes.
praise God.
Yes. That's right. It's an expression of agreement. It's a praise God. It's just a sheer expression of joy, like a guttural expression of joy.
Yeah, is anything else that you want to tell me about the musical tradition that you're like, we missed that. We should cover.
So just to lay it out, there's the different houses, right? The word Beit in Semitic languages, Beit, like Beit David or Beit Dawid is the house of David. Beit means house, right? So each
Hmm.
school is called like the house of this, the house of that, the house of that. So you have the Eucharistic liturgy that's called Kadase Beit, okay? The
Okay.
main division is between Kadase Beit and Zema Beit. Zema Beit means house of melodies, which is not helpful in the name because there are melodies in the liturgical as well.
Right.
Kadase is the word kadus, holy, and it's the same in Hebrew and Aramaic and Arabic as well. But for us, it's how we refer to the Mass or the liturgy. So those are the two main divisions. In the Kadase Beit, which is the liturgical house, you have the Eucharistic liturgy and you have the liturgy of hours, and both of those are studied. Then go to
Okay.
Zema Beit. Zema Beit is divided first into the books of Saint Jared the Aksumite, or Saint Yared, who's considered the chief melodist of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, a 6th century figure. And he has, depending on how you count it, 3 to 5 books. His main book of hymnography is called the Digwa. So there's a specific place, which is the House of Digwa, where you
Hmm.
go and learn Digwa, right?
I've never thought of the name Jared as a Christian name before. I thought it was like, where did
Interesting.
the name Jared come from? But I
Yeah,
guess it's a Christian name.
it
So
is. He is actually the father of Enoch in Genesis.
yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fair enough.
Yeah, who is then the father of Methuselah and all that. But this is a 6th century AD figure named
Hmm.
Jared, Saint Jared the priest they call him, or Saint Jared or Saint Yared. We do it with a Y, Yared. If you search him, he'll come up. He's the main composer, the main melodist. There are others who come after him, but it's the Jaridian tradition. And so you have his
Okay.
Book of Dugwa, which is about 800 pages, and it's huge. And there are small notations. There are 10 musical notations that are at least 1,000 years old and potentially 1,500 years old that are used in that book, which are
Now,
then
are any of these translated into English?
no, not even
Because
Amharic.
sometimes I like to buy these, so I have them. But if it's
Um,
if it's all in Amharic
There,
or
there,
Ge'ez,
there
then
was
there's
a
no. It's like,
recent
okay, I'm not gonna understand.
dissertation out of Hamburg University in Germany. I haven't read 600 pages about him.
Okay,
And there's
in
another
German,
in English.
in
Uh,
English, out of
yeah,
Hamburg.
yeah. They do a lot of English scholarship. Yeah,
Interesting.
they do a lot of English scholarship,
Hmm.
and they have a huge Ethiopian and Eritrean studies program.
Really, in
Yeah,
Hamburg.
yeah. They have another one in Rome.
I would never guess that is.
Yeah, it's a huge site. It's all goes back to this individual I think called Eob or Job Ludolf in the 1600s, and
Hmm.
these German Orientalists, and they built off of that tradition.
Fascinating.
Um, yeah, and they had some monks visit that taught them Ge'ez, and then they maintained the tradition somehow, and then lost it and revitalized it. But there's that. There's Father Andualem has his dissertation on the music tradition. His dissertation is available from University of Toronto. Okay,
Okay.
so and that's another place where the artist Abel the Weekend donated about $100,000 to Ethiopian studies, good studies at the University of Toronto. And then there's an older guy, I think his name is Abreha, who wrote about 70 pages in English about Saint Yared. And then there's one French guy who wrote about him in French. So those are the things available. Three English works and one French work on Saint Yared. I think there are a couple Italian works I'm not aware of as well, also written about it.
Okay.
But yeah, he has the Dugwa. He has another book called Mi'raf. He has another book. Mi'raf are like really it's a part of the Dugwa and a part of the Akwakwam, the instrumental worship. There's another separate house for the instrumental worship. This is just the bass melodies. Then there's a book called Zimmare, which are songs exclusively for communion. And then there's a song or a hymnal called the Mawasa'it. And the Mawasa'it is the Book of the Dead. And so those are only for funerary services. So you have
Okay.
a book of funerary services, a book of communion songs, and a book of hymns for every Sunday of the year and really every day of the year. And then the Alquaquam, which adds the choreography of the walking stick and the sistrum and the drum. Whereas these main books of Saint Yared just add the raw or base level melodies. The Alquaquam tradition introduces the choreography to it.
Interesting. And so most of the melodies in the Ethiopian tradition go back to him.
They are attributed to him. I would say probably him and the school established in his name after.
Are new melodies and chants being written?
Um, in the form of Aquaquam, they are being written and there are new styles forming and they have been forming. And even the styles that they think stay the same, when you listen to recordings from different times, you could hear the variation that sort of naturally occurs, even when they're trying to preserve it. But they all justify themselves and root themselves in Saint Yared.
Okay. And the new mezmur, that would be new.
That's all brand new, and the laity makes that up every day. I've made up some stuff myself.
Oh,
Well,
okay.
I'm not musical. Mostly,
Okay.
mostly translations.
So it's like the Eucharistic stuff. That stays the same.
Yes.
But the
There's going to be a natural drift and shift and stuff, but yes,
but the Aquaquam is
that's the
being
newest.
transformed a little bit.
Yeah. It's the least
And
centralized of all the musical traditions. It's the least centralized. So you have these rival schools that are battling to see what's going to become the most popular. And each decade, like one school is becoming more popular than another, and it's not clear. And the synod has not ruled that like you could only use one. So depending where you go regionally in Ethiopia and in the diaspora, you'll come across different traditions. Sometimes there's a
interesting.
clash when you have multiple choir masters at a big cathedral from these different traditions, and they're like, which one are we going to do?
Okay. Fascinating. Wow. Yeah, there's a lot there, and I'm sure there's a lot that we could continue to unpack for like hours and hours. The Ethiopian tradition is, I sometimes as Anglican, with very little asceticism, I look at the Orthodox and I think, wow, man, the Orthodox are, they're fasting all the time, and they're doing prostrations, and they have these long services. And then I look, and the Coptics are saying, what are you talking about? The Orthodox aren't even ascetic anymore. They've abandoned all of their asceticism. Like, we fast all the time, And so, and it's like, okay. And so, like, and they're not like 3-hour services. What? We're gonna have like 6-hour services, and their Holy Week looks crazy. And then the Ethiopians are like, hold my beer, you know. They're like, no, we're gonna have 10-hour, 12-hour services, and we're never going to eat ever.
Yeah.
So it's like, the Ethiopians put us American Anglicans to shame when it comes to all of that.
Thank you, for saying it. Sometimes it could turn into holier than thou or more righteous than thou, and that's always the fear. But I do find our tradition to be beautiful in all that it offers. It offers people the ideal of the liturgy of the hours and of the digwa, and they're two competing musical traditions.
Mm-hmm.
The Sa'atat, or the liturgy of hours, and the digwa of Saint Yared. The ideal of both of them was to present 24 hours of worship, so that people could come and worship at all times. There's one manuscript attributed to Abba George or Abba Georgis of Sagla, which has 24 hours of musical notated worship. And the idea is you could go to church at any time of day and worship, and that it's supposed to be heaven on earth. That's the ideal that they strive for.
Are there churches or monasteries that do that?
There are, if you go to Gondar city, which I believe Tolkien took from Ethiopia, but Gondar, if you go to Gondar,
okay.
which is one of the main cities in Ethiopia, you can find a full vigil from about 8 p.m. to 10 a.m., probably 26 out of 30 days a month, if you wanted to. That wouldn't all be at the same site. It would be each church has a different saint it's named after. But you could be in the city of Gondar, or for that matter, the capital city, Addis Ababa, and almost every day of the month, if you wanted to, if you had the time off, you could participate in this type of a vigil. Almost that long, like 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. And then I don't know when you're going to sleep, So I don't know when you sleep in between that. But 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. is when the Eucharistic liturgy starts. So really 8 p.m. to 10 a.m., more than 20 days a month, you could find that in Ethiopia.
Wow. And then I guess there's not really. Then are there more services from 10 a.m. till 8 p.m.?
During the fasting season, there are. During the non-fasting season, there are not.
Okay.
Yeah. And
Wow,
on paper, we have the 24-hour worship. Not people aren't doing the 24 hours, but they're doing about 12 to 14.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
Yep, that's a ton. Well, Henok, thanks for talking with me today. I would love to do it again and keep going. I've got to prep for a funeral I got to play in about an
Godspeed,
hour.
and thank you for having me on.
Do you like Bach? I know you like Bach. You should buy a copy of my CD, Bach's Klavierübung Dritte Teil, at the Waltershausen Trostorgan, which you can purchase on my website, MatthewWilkinson.net. There is a link below.